source that fed the original spring. So in 1513, it is an actual artesian spring, and is one of the main sources of drinking water for the Timucuan people who had been here for thousands of years beforehand. Ponce de León is never actually looking for a fountain of youth, but he is searching for fresh water, and that's eventually what leads him to our shore. He's only here for about 5 days or so, and then he vamooses, and he's never in this area of the world again. He ends up dying about 7 years later, and it's after his death that he gets connected to the fountain of youth legend and myth and rumor and things like that. So because he was here and drank from the spring on property, we get to say that we are the fountain of youth, but in reality, he would hate being attached to it that way. The spring itself stays an artisanal spring all the way up until the 1870s. By that point, we're a territory of the United States, and this is private property. The owners of the property, the Williams family, they have found relics here before. They had found things like pottery, ironwork from the original colony, from that Timucuan village. But being so close to downtown St. Augustine, they kind of just shrug their shoulders and assume that it's not par for the course, but it's something that you get being an historic district. And so they are the ones to actually transform the original spring. So when the spring starts to dry up, they're the ones to put a well smack dab on top. Now we have, now it is the exact same spring, or excuse me, the exact same well. We do have to go a little bit deeper than they did. We go down about 240 feet, and we pump it straight out of the Florida aquifer. So it's the same water source. The aquifer naturally feeds all the freshwater springs in Florida. We just have to help the water around a little bit now. Any questions, though, please feel free, okay? It's totally up to you to explore. Yeah, no worries.
One thing that we know, they used bunches of them to build this colony, or nails of all different sizes. But the nails of that time period don't look like the ones that we use nowadays. Back then, it didn't matter how small or how big the nail was, they were square, 4 flat sides. Modern nails are round and smooth because they're made by machines in factories. Their nails were square because they were hammered out by hand with hammers. Square just happens to be the fast, easy way to do it.
Rose heads?
The hammer flattens the top, the anvil flattens the bottom. Every time I strike, I'm flattening 2 sides. Corner turn, hit it again, 4 sides, square nail. Put a point on it, I just go back and forth on 2 sides. That'll keep it square as I stretch it out to a point. So square was the fastest, easiest way to make a nail with a hammer, and that's why they made them square. It just made more sense. So first thing we got to do is get our metal hot. Now guys, blacksmiths don't use thermometers. We judge the heat by the color of the metal. You've all heard of red hot. All your lives you've heard of red hot, but that's just where it starts. As the metal gets hotter and softer, it's going to glow lighter and brighter in color. So to go from red hot up to orange hot, from orange hot up to yellow hot, from yellow hot all the way up to white hot. We never bring the metal all the way up to white hot. That'll just melt it and ruin it. To make a nail, red won't be hot enough. Yellow will be too hot. So we're going to go with good old dependable orange hot. That'll be just right. So let's see what we have in our forge. Yep, orange hot. Okay, we'll start by flattening 2 sides of our nail. Give it a quarter turn and flatten the other 2 sides to make it square. Now I go back and forth on my first 2 sides, keeping it square. As I stretch the end out longer and thinner, I just angle the head of my hammer to bring it down to a sharp point. While it's still hot and soft, I get to decide how long our nail is going to be, because right now it's way too long to be a nail. So we'll use this cutting tool called the Hardy to just tap in 4 deep notches. Being careful not to cut that nail all the way off, because we're not done. That nail is currently missing something that every nail has to have. What's missing, guys?
A head.
It doesn't have a head. Well, that's not a big problem, really. To put a head on a nail, all you got to do is hit the nail on the head. Well, that's how it works. You get the metal hot to make it soft, so you can use your hammer to squish it, like squishing Play-Doh or modeling clay. Then you need a tool that'll hold the nail so it's got nowhere to go. Lock your nail in place, break it off where you notched it, making sure you leave up just a little bit of hot, soft metal. That's going to become the head of our nail. Because now I'm going to take my hammer and hit the nail on the head, but what I'm doing is squishing that nub of metal shorter, forcing it to expand and create a head on the end of my nail. Just that simple.
is a replica from a 16th century boat they would use to offload the ships and bring them to shore. So this is known as a chalupa. It's a basic ship-to-shore boat. Yeah. So Florida is a giant sandbar. Any large ship that would come in like a Spanish galleon, they were forced to anchor their ships 3 miles out. And not from here, 3 miles from Anastasia Island. But large ships can't get any closer. So this is what they would use to transport all the materials from the ship to the island.
Here comes the smell of history. Hey, if anybody likes the way that smells, we have job applications in the ticket office.